Hi everyone and welcome. We're about to go feed my worms, and before we do, we're just going to take a quick look here in my tracking spreadsheet. You can see I've got a number of active worm bins. One of them is outside. That one has European nightcrawlers and red wigglers in it. Here we've got a couple of vermi bags that have either African nightcrawlers or European nightcrawlers in them. And the bins that I have downstairs, the normal tubs, those are all red wigglers. And one of them hasn't really been fed since it received a full pumpkin, and that pumpkin is being time-lapse videoed to see how it gets consumed over time. So that's pretty much everything that I've got going on. And the thing that has happened most recently with my primary bins inside, my bins in my bags, is that I felt like the feedings were either picking up too much momentum and I had placed too much food in those bins, or maybe the activity in the bins has slowed down. So I had found fairly large amounts of leftover food from previous feedings. The last time I checked in on these two bins, the only thing I added was a small amount of food in the form of coffee, but mainly a boost to their bedding, a little bit extra cardboard in there. Here on the outside worm bin, fed 2 weeks ago, I threw a few watermelon rinds in there. And I'm just curious to see if after 2 weeks, have those been consumed, or if not, how far along are they? Since this is an outdoor bin, there is always that chance that the activity in that one is dropped to very slow because of the cold temperatures. But today it's a warm day, good day to go outside and poke around. So we'll start with the outside worm bin first, and work our way down into the wormery to check on how the rest of my bags and bins are doing. So this is what you see after you remove the outdoor bin from its spot where it was resting on the ground. It always has a fair number of worms hanging out. Probably a regular in and out movement. I think this is perfectly normal. Let's go check inside the bin. So now, like I've done in the past, I'm going to take out some of the leaf cover and throw it into this basket just so it's easier to work, so we can more easily see where the worms are. So I guess it's cantaloupe melon, not watermelon. I thought I had thrown watermelon in here for these guys, but I guess it was cantaloupe. And I don't really see too much. Well, actually, you know what? Underneath, yep, that's where it is. That's where all the fun's happening. Right underneath the meaty part of the melon. This one piece was flipped over, so the fleshy part of the melon was facing down. It's all covered with worms. So let's give them their food back. And now that I'm looking at it this way, with all of this food that they've still got to eat, not to mention all the leaves themselves also counting as food, I don't think it's necessary to add more food here. So I'm glad we had a chance to check in on these guys. I might actually leave this bin right here where it is because the sun is about to shine here. That'll give them a nice little boost of warmth, little treat that they probably haven't enjoyed in a couple weeks now. No more food for these guys, at least not right away. Maybe at some point soon. Alright, so down here in my wormery, the next oldest bins are the bins that have aged the most since they were last fed. As you'll remember, the outside worm bin was last fed 14 days ago, and the melon that was still in there looked fine. So these two vermi bags, the vermi bag tote with the African nightcrawlers and the vermi bag mini with the European nightcrawlers, with them, it's been 10 days since they were last fed. However, they didn't receive a large feeding. They only receive a little bit of coffee, mainly bedding. So today we're going to see if there's an opportunity to maybe add a little bit more food to these. We'll begin with the vermi bag mini that has the European nightcrawlers in it. 10 days since they received a little boost to their bedding and a little bit of coffee sprinkle on top of their old food. here, we can already see some signs of their old food. You can already see a couple worms hanging out on the surface as well. They're retreating because of the light overhead. So let's dig down a little bit into this previous feeding zone here, just to see how some of these old food bits are progressing. Here we have a corn cob, and as you can see, there's little worms cruising around on it. Corn cobs almost seem like they're worm nurseries. It always seems like the little tiny worms favor the corn cobs once they eventually find it. It's interesting too, because this definitely had some more thickness to it when I first put it in here. It's just gradually getting thinner and thinner. This, I believe this apple will go back maybe a couple feedings, and it's just a whole apple still right now, or at least so it seems. This is kind of interesting, with these worms burrowing down into the core of the corn cob. They always seem to like the center of it the best. And here we have a little piece of forbidden food, a little bit of orange. Citrusy foods are supposedly no-nos in the worm bin, but I'm doing a little test to see how it goes. Only because I've seen it done successfully in other people's wormeries as well. This apple's starting to get mushy. Now, as I make my way further down, I feel like I'm encountering mainly castings. It somehow felt to me like I had removed far more food last time, so I think they've actually made their way through the majority of what they've been getting recently. The foods that we did notice here, these couple of food items, apples and corn cobs specifically, and maybe the orange as well, all sort of either, you know, almost glacial. These are all fairly slow composting items, and they'll eventually get broken down completely, but their progress over time is rather slow. So I think it's safe at this point to proceed with a normal feeding in this bin as I would normally be doing. So let me go grab some food. Finally get to clear out some of the space in the freezer. So the food scraps that they're getting have been sitting around in the freezer for so long now. I'm so glad to finally have a chance to make a little bit of space to clear out what I've been stockpiling for these guys for how long now. So a nice little handful of food, and we'll drop in all these other additional slow composting existing food items that were in here already. Just looking at how much we've got here. What I added was pretty small, finely chopped stuff. I think that's going to go pretty quick. Let me give them another handful. Alright. I believe some of this stuff was just old cauliflower. So a little bit of grit to go on top of the food. And then we'll cover up with our normal staple used coffee grounds. Okay, things are looking pretty good here in this vermi bag with the European night crawlers. Let's get this feeding zone covered back up and restore all this bedding. So weird, I usually use leaves to scatter the top of my bins with bedding, but I figured I'd try paper. I was worried it would dry out, but it feels like it's doing pretty good. It's holding the moisture quite nicely, so I can't complain. Alright. The inhabitants of my vermibag tote, as I might have mentioned earlier, are African night crawlers. So both vermibags are night crawlers. These are Africans. The other one is Europeans. And I've been treating these bags very similarly, so now here in my Vermibag tote, where the African night crawlers are, we have something very similar to what we saw in the Vermibag Mini, where the European night crawlers are. We had the same scenario play out here in this bin as well. We came in here to feed 10 days ago, found that it was still doing pretty good with the previous feedings leftovers. So we added a little bit of coffee here on top, and the main thing that this bin received was down below the feeding, which is a fresh boost of bedding. Here's another apple, but you can see this one's much further along than the ones we saw in the other bins. Here's another one, a much newer, much more intact apple, which will eventually look just like that soon, but not so soon. That's the thing. The apples and the corn seem to take some time, so you've got to be patient. I believe this might have been a mango, but it's so hard to tell after a while once the worms have had a chance to start working it down. Alright, so now I think we might have observed this once before in these bags, is that the smell of the feeding zone is a little bit funky. So stuff is really, rotting at this point, which the worms are probably loving. And I think the only thing is that I just don't have so many worms that that they'd be able to break through this much food in so little time. So while the Vermibag Mini with the Euros in it seemed like it was ready for a fresh feeding, I believe in the case of this bin, it might be best just to hold off again. That's just the way I feel from looking through here. There's a lot of decomposing food, which is almost at the state of just mush, combined with some vermicompost around it, mixing in nicely with the bedding down there. But some of these larger chunks that I fished out from the beginning, they've got a ways to go. And just based on the overall size of this bin, it seems to me like we're probably just fine restoring this to the way we found it and not adding food in this particular case. So not a big deal. I'm just kind of hoping to be able to get rid of all this food that I bought down from the freezer. I think all this food in here, the best thing we could do is just give it a little extra boost of grit. That always helps. And since there is room for it, a little tiny bit of coffee. I know it's not much, but I guess this way I can feel like I've given it a little bit more something, and I can mark it as such in the log sheet. Show that it was fed, but hardly. It's just a checkbox as far as I'm concerned. I'm not weighing the food, I'm not measuring it. If I give it anything, then I'll mark it. Come on, African night crawlers. Got some catching up to do. I'm just wondering if it's because it's a little bit cooler down here in my basement. It's not cold, but it is cool. Just makes me wonder if it's maybe cool enough that it's slowing the African night crawlers down a little bit. If I'm not mistaken, I think these guys thrive in higher temperatures, and maybe the cool temperatures make them slow down a bit. It would be a fair explanation, because it does seem like things have slowed down, at least in the African nightcrawler bag. All right, let's move on to the red wigglers. Okay, now with the red wigglers, it's been 7 days since they were fed, but they were also fed the same way as the Vermibags. They received a little bit of coffee on top of mainly a boost to their bedding. So here you can see some of the coffee they received last time. It's kind of commingled with a little bit of casting material, so it does seem like they've been cruising around on the surface a little bit, which these worms like to do. They like to be near the surface. That's why it's always fun when you start peeling back the top layer of the material that they're hanging out in. They're usually right there at the top surface. So now this apple is really making some nice progress. I mean, it's a big apple, but it's so soft. It's just mush inside. You can see there's worms hanging out all over it. Enjoying the juices. So let's see how the rest of this bin is doing. Here I'm feeling bedding. I'm encountering a lot of it right off the bat. And like all the bins and bags got last time I came in here, it was mainly a light coffee feeding, but mainly a boost to their bedding. So that's why we're seeing all these scraps of bedding in here. Here's a peach pit, slow composting item that we're tracking in this bin. Although I think here in the red wiggler bins we don't have any ears of corn. Got some apple happening here and there, which is a slow composting item. But I think most everything that they've been getting lately is more quick composting type stuff. So, alright, I'm going to throw these pieces of paper that we encountered on the way down. Just add them to the bedding down here, because it does seem like adding more food to this one is going to be necessary. So it looks like there's little scraps. Here's a banana stem, I think, and obviously this apple and the peach pit. But it seems like everything else that they were given, for the most part at least, this might be that tomato, is more or less gone at this point. So let's get their, let's see if I can get some of their bedding back down in there. Not sure if this is compostable, but we'll see. Get some more of their bedding down in here. Because bedding I'm not going to add, I'm just going to sprinkle in some more food. Material is really nice. Okay, so here we have a mango pit also. It's getting a little bit more pliable. I'm always curious to see if they've made their way into it yet or not. But I really can't see in yet. Doesn't mean they haven't found their way in yet. It's possible. So we'll see. By next time I'm sure we'll be able to see what's going on in there. Alright. Let's toss in a little food for them. So that might seem like a fairly generous feeding, but I think it's no different from my normal feedings. Pretty good amount, which is what they normally get. And I think we've left enough for the next bin. I want to leave enough for the next bin, but it seemed like there was room for one more handful. So we'll give them a good hearty feeding here. Oops. Reinforce the grit. Make sure they're not running low on grit. And get rid of some of this coffee. Well, I've only got a little bit left in here. We'll save it for the other bin. Now, out here on the edges, I usually like to poke around down here on the outer edges to see how the moisture is holding up in the bin. And it's really nice. The moisture is doing just perfect out here on the edges. Certainly no need to worry about that. It looks really good. The material is so nice and fluffy all around. Over here it's a little bit dry, but not, no, I wouldn't say dry. Just, you can see worms are hanging out in it, so if it was dry, that wouldn't be the case. They'd be avoiding it. It's good. It's good stuff. It's got nice crumbly texture to it. And, yeah, see, out here too. Material has the same sort of consistency, and the worms will obviously love it. You can see there's just tons of them hanging out over here. This looks a little bit drier, and see, no worms hanging out. So, let's see how this last little handful looks. Here again, it looks pretty nice. Plenty of worms hanging out. Everyone looks happy. So, that's fine. A little pocket of dry over here. I've just mixed it in with some more damp material. So I think we're in good shape in here. Very nice. Love the way these bins are coming along. One more bin to go. Whew. Now this one's got some weight to it, that's for sure. Alrighty. Here too you could see some of the remains of the previous feeding, which was coffee sprinkled over the previous feeding. Very very light feeding here too. Start peeling back, we'll begin seeing worms right away. The material here is very damp. Oh, and a lot more worms hanging out. And maybe I misspoke. Maybe this is my most active bin. Definitely a lot of worms in here. It's good to know because I've got this new bin on the shelf. It's going to be started in the next day or two, and I'm going to use red wigglers. And they're going to come either out of this bin or the other bin, or maybe I'll get volunteers from both bins. But it is time for me to launch off a new bin. This right here is actually the baby. This is the newest of my bins, which is actually 3.5 months old at this point, so it's certainly not young by any standard. It's a fairly mature bin. It's probably ready to start winding down, making its way towards its harvest. So it's the main reason I want to start thinking about getting a new bin underway. And I built a new bin almost 2 weeks ago now. It's been sitting on the shelf, kind of just getting primed, ready for the new inhabitants. And I believe it's ready. It's ready at this point to get new worms added to it. So down here, I mean, it's like a half of an apple, I think. It's the only thing I was able to find that's large and whole like that. Everything else is mush that I encountered for the most part. Nothing really recognizable. You'll see that I did also hit a lot of bedding, because this bin got the same treatment too. Added a whole bunch of bedding underneath the old existing food layers, and a little bit of coffee last time. So here too, I think we're just going to go ahead and dump out what remains of the allotted food for today's feeding. I think it's going to be a perfect amount. This is all very finely chopped stuff. They're going to go through this in no time. They're going to love this. It's a nice feeding. Got a little bit left. We'll save that. And we'll get rid of what remains of this coffee. Okay. So we're almost done here. I really did think that I'd be able to feed all my bins, but in that African Nightcrawler Vermibag tote, it just seemed like we just had way too much food to be adding more. So hopefully you'll agree with me on what we did in that one. I mean, the little bit of coffee that we did add is almost just a technicality, so I can mark that off as having been fed today on my spreadsheet. And you know, I've got peace of mind that that there's plenty of food in there to last them, but I don't have like this gap showing that there was no feeding today. Prefer just to have some sort of an indication of some food having been fed, even if it's a little bit. Okay. Wonder how things are on the sides here. Pretty damp, pretty well populated with worms. Everyone seems pretty happy and healthy out on the edges. I'm always wanting to see how things are progressing on the edges, because I sometimes have little bits of problems with dryness out here on the edges. But ever since I boosted up to a second layer of cardboard covering up my container, it seems like it's doing the perfect job of keeping the moisture down within the material. As you can see, it's the perfect consistency for the worms. It's full of worms, and they're all gladly making their way through their food and their bedding. This bin looks really good too. Can't complain. So I think when it comes time to get some volunteers together to populate my new bin in the next few days, I think either of these red wiggler bins would do great for trying to get some volunteers together. So I'll go ahead and I'll pack up here, but before I do, I won't keep you around for that. That's boring. I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for sticking with me and watching my video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, remember to give me a thumbs up. That's really appreciated. And also consider subscribing to the channel as well. That's always really appreciated too. Alright everyone, thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.